talk next about a case study from an academic perspective from a team, a group from the University of California who've done some work on ebook usability assessments. So joining us are Rachel Hu, who is User Experience Manager at California Digital Library, Chan Lee, who is Assessment Librarian at UC Berkeley, and Michelle Potter, who is Collection Strategist for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics at UC Riverside. They're going to be a team talking about this project. Not sure which one of you is going to go first.
Todd, I will start. So I will share my slides.
Okay, fantastic. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm gonna put it on the speaker mode. Okay. All right. Just before I introduce and talk about our topic today, I would just like to recognize and then pay respect to the indigenous people who once lived where UC campuses stand today. A little bit background about the UC system-wide structure and how our group fits into this structure. UC libraries include 10 UC campus plus California Digital Library. There are so many system-wide groups and committees that provide collaborative leadership, vision, and strategic planning to develop services, strategy, and technological systems. And they also make shared licensing decisions as well. And then another groups called common knowledge groups are much less formal groups. And they're mostly self-organized standing groups of experts or pioneers in the areas of interest to the UC libraries. And our group is part of the Common Knowledge Group. Our group's name is UC Ebook Usability Common Knowledge Group. And we have representatives from multiple UC campuses plus CDL, which is California Digital Library. And we all have this common interest on the ebook usability topic. This is our group chart and our goals when we first established in 2016. Just like any other academic libraries, UC libraries, we have increased tremendously our ebook holdings during the last 5 years or even more. But user experiences on the ebook discovery, searching, and reading are not particularly optimal for users. Especially reading ebooks on the e-reader is quite challenging. The user experiences are quite inconsistent, multiple vendors, multiple interface, different technology. Vendor also develop their proprietary web interfaces, their different proprietary mobile apps. The licensed and open access content, they are not available through one interface. Content are often fragmented across multiple formats, including like DRM or non-DRM. So when we first established, we wanted to explore this list of the topics here, like how the licensing terms DRM affect the user's experience, platform features, content format, reading devices, and also other tools like annotation, other social sharing tools, accessibility is another issue that we wanted to explore. The audiences which our work findings and reports are targeted to are, first of all, is the folks and groups within UC who are making those shared licensing decisions. And oftentimes usability is not a deal breaker in licensing negotiations. So we wanted to increase the awareness for the folks who are making those decisions or who are negotiating with vendors. And second of all are the individual campus strategists and selectors, and also vendors as well. We do want to provide feedback back to the vendors and publishers who can actually make the changes on our platform. The last but not the least is the whole library publisher vendor community. This is something we gradually realized that some of the work that we have done so far, developed or in the future, that could be beneficial to others. And the whole efforts, and my colleague going to talk more about the work that we're doing, but this efforts could be more collaborative efforts going forward. I will hand this over to Rachel.
Thank you, Chan. Hi, I'm Rachel Hugh, and I'm the UX manager at CDL. I'm here to talk a little bit about sort of the main goal of the group was to really develop a set of usability criteria that could be used to evaluate different types of ebook platforms and different types of ebook reading experiences that we license. We took multiple steps in the development of this criteria. The first step was a literature review, where we researched whether there were other ebook criteria available in the field. And surprisingly enough, very few had been published at the time of our initial research phase. So that was definitely sort of identifying a gap there that we saw. And in order to generate our own list of evaluation criteria, group members kicked the tires on a set of books across several major platforms, looking for common issues and noting features that worked well and would be useful to the user. As Letty mentioned in her talk, though, we tried to look at both discrete interactions around a particular feature, but also how those discrete interactions connected together to impact the entire overall experience for a particular platform. We then grouped the issues and features into categories. Once this initial set of criteria was drafted, we continued to refine the criteria as we embarked on a more concerted evaluation effort for the first 3 platforms that we officially assessed. Next slide. Great. And here are some of the major groupings for our criteria. The first grouping included thoughts around searching, browsing, resource discovery, and navigation. This grouping really looked in detail at available search fields with an ebook platform, full text searching feature. So really digging into some of the details of a discrete feature, the ability to filter and sort, and how a recommender functionality is implemented. But also it looking at the user's overall discovery path to the ebook resource itself. And that tangled web of navigation, again, that Letty alluded to in her introductory talk, was something that we took a look at. The presentation and layout grouping focused on overall branding, how the initial ebook landing page was laid out, how the ebook page itself was laid out, how chapters were laid out, how search and browse pages were laid out. The reading experience category focused on exploring features such as general printing, how limited the print capacity could be, what the ability to download looked like, how usable the highlighting and bookmarking features were, and how easy and flexible the citation export feature might be in a particular platform. Another part of this overall reading experience was how ADA compliant the ebook content itself was. Was it well structured? Was it machine readable? And how easy are the navigational features for all users? As well, this criteria category really examined hyperlinking and multimedia interactions, so how the users engaged with those elements. We also had an overall sort of reader compatibility category that helped us assess device compatibility, usability of a read inside of platform format versus a download format. As well, the reader compatibility category looked at features that included search, such as the copy and paste, whether or not that feature was available to users within the reader itself. Finally, this category looked at whether or not the platform had a separate app available for users. In our analysis work, we noted whether or not the items in each category was available. Then in subsequent evaluation work, we assigned each feature a rating between 1 to 5, with 5 being the most successful implementation of a feature. The criteria established is really a living criteria list that can be adjusted and has been adjusted as we've been moving through our different assessments. And it applies to a variety of different ebook reading experiences. And as we've ventured out to testing other ebook environments, we've either expanded or collapsed certain criteria areas as needed. And I wonder if such a usability criteria listing, such as the one we developed, might open up sort of a partially quantitative, partially qualitative, and structured UX or IXD evaluation method that could be used in a more independent way that doesn't need to be a facilitated one-on-one experience. So that's kind of an interesting question for future. Next slide. So back to the work we did in our first evaluation and reporting effort. As I mentioned before, we continue to refine our criteria, especially as it applies to specific platforms that we explored. In this first official testing phase, we honed in on Cambridge Core, Wiley Online Library, and Elsevier's Science Direct, and included those in our initial report. In the initial round of assessment, we chose to evaluate platforms that were publisher-based, DRM-free, collectively purchased for all of our campuses, and substantively cross-disciplinary. We purposefully selected books from each interface that would sort of move us into several different disciplinary areas. Next slide. So we developed the first report and utilized the criteria established in the following ways. Group members were assigned a particular criteria grouping and performed an in-depth analysis of these features across the publishing platforms. Members became experts in a particular feature area. Summative analysis of a feature set was written that covered findings across the 3 platforms that were analyzed. The analysis included which features were available or not available, describing desirable design and interactions, articulating performance criteria, sort of overall performance criteria, and whether or not there were general barriers to access, and finally, overall recommendations for a particular feature area. The final report was submitted to UC's Shared Licensing Leadership Group on December 20th in 2019. And now I'll turn over to my colleague, Michelle, to discuss the findings from our initial report.
Thank you, Rachel. So these are the key findings, and I want to start by mentioning that there was no perfect interface and no particularly bad interface. We don't necessarily want to call out, anybody for any particular reason. We just want to show some of the issues that we came across. So in our first category, searching and navigation, we found that searching only full books up front was rare, and that searching inside of a book had problematic aspects. For example, searching full upfront, you can see right here on this example, which is Cambridge Core, that there is the option of searching journals and books at the same time, and the users might not necessarily be interested in searching all of those things together. And then searching or filtering by what we have access to. In this case, you can see that that is an upfront option, but that is inconsistent. Sorting results by reasonable categories was also inconsistent. I have here that Wiley does not allow sorting by date. I didn't mean to call them out just uniquely because Science Direct also has some various different types of landing pages that show you chapters or books. And they also have limitations, in some cases not allowing search by title or sorting by title, and in some cases not allowing sorting at all. We also wanted to mention that breadcrumbs were something that we found was not universal. Many of the platforms that we've looked at so far have made an attempt with breadcrumbs, but sometimes we would find ourselves down a long road, and find that we could not get back from that point to any sort of starting point. Also, links within and outside of resources we found to be inconsistent, and when we did find them, it only increased our appetite for seeing more of these kinds of linking, both within the platforms and also within the reading experience. Next slide, please. So in this case, we're talking about presentation, and we know that there's a balance that the platforms, the publishers must strike between having adequate links and information and sort of an appearance of busyness, sort of an overwhelmingness. And I say this as I present to you a fairly busy slide, but again, we see this as a continuum, and some publishers and platforms went one direction and some the other. A feature that we found to be really important that was sort of inconsistently applied was the ability to tell if we have access to a particular book looking at a list of chapter results. And this is was not universal, although this sort of demonstrates that there are multiple approaches. In some case, it was possible to filter to items that you have, but in those cases, maybe they didn't work so hard on making it clear when you got to a landing page that you did or did not have access. Also, findability of and access to key information on the pages. On one particular platform, the title text block was so large that one had to scroll significantly down to get to the table of contents. So that was the kind of thing we were looking for. How quickly could you get to certain key pieces of information? I would say in this case, the prominence also of read now versus buy the print book. And in one case, it's not buy the print, it's get access. One of the publishers says get access, but these are items that we already have access to. So this could be a very confusing user experience that they land on this page we supposedly have access to. And the first thing they see is buy print or get access. I will also mention that one of the platforms, and I will not mention the name, had distracting rotating ads on their pages, which either have gone away or I now have a better ad blocker. Either way, I have to say, yay, it has improved the experience significantly. Next slide, please. So obviously, looking at the reading experience of these publisher platforms, all three are substantively based on downloading PDF. When one gets to either a book or a chapter landing page, it is expected that one would click on the download PDF. But I will say that we were looking for nuances in this case. For instance, books as EPUB. This is something we've explored significantly in our team. EPUB book having a more broadly applicable reading experience. None of these publishers had this, but I don't want to say that it's not possible because, for instance, Springer Link does include download the book as EPUB as an option. And if many people aware of the public library domain would know that EPUBs are available for many platforms in which it might be expected that a person might read on a smaller device like a phone. Books as HTML. So two of our platforms offered books as HTML. This is kind of an interesting double-edged sword because if you're seeing the HTML when you click on the PDF, that could actually be counting double in your counter statistics. So, but on the other hand, oftentimes if they did provide the book as HTML, it had a significant amount of linking amongst parts. And that sort of experience, knowing that the reading experience is not always a fully linear one, and sometimes it's important to jump back and forth in your text, that acknowledgement, putting those sorts of links in HTML is an important one. Only one of the publishers kept that linking consistent when the PDF was downloaded. And so that was something that we were quite impressed by. So the highlighting, bookmarking, and exporting experience is a little problematic again in these PDFs. Sometimes, in the matter of comparing these, it seems as if we're comparing apples to oranges instead of apples to apples. But there are reading platforms that do allow highlighting and annotating. So it would be something that is important to the reading experience, but because in order to do that, the users, the researchers are downloading to whatever PDF reader they have, and we don't know what they're using. And usually the ones that have excellent highlighting and annotating features probably cost money. We are seeing a potentially uneven reading, researching experience there. Science Direct does now have an integrated reader, but it hasn't actually put much in the way of features into it, and that would be something exciting to see. So the ability to download the entire book into one file rather than chapter by chapter is an interesting one, because when you download from one of the publishers, for instance, you click on download this book and it actually gives you all of the chapters, which can be something like 25 chapters in a zip file. And in that case, luckily, the chapters are logically named, so you could use them, but that's not really, I think, what people imagine when they are imagining downloading an entire book. So the ability to download an entire book into one file, one of the platforms we looked at allowed you, or made you, I'm not really sure which way to think of that, check the box next to the chapter in order to download also multiple chapters into a zip file. And this is good in a way because it does allow for more control, but it's also problematic because if there was a second page listing of the chapter contents, they wouldn't all come down in the same file. So, so that was something we were looking carefully at. Also, logical file names for downloads. I'm sure anyone here has had a situation in which they download files from various different, platforms and then find that they're impossible to find because they're named so very oddly. In one bizarre and strange case, the publisher that downloaded the entire book into zipped file and had logical names, if you downloaded an individual chapter from that platform, it had a very, very strange file name. So that was something also that could be a user experience, even usually later than we think about the user experience being. And then options for exporting citations to text and reference managers. This was actually fairly consistent across the various different platforms we looked at, but we do mention it because in some cases it may be harder or easier to find the ability to do that. It also might be a situation in which different publishers, different platforms which concentrate in different disciplines offer some options for citation that others do not. Next slide, please. So this is the accessibility side, and Rachel is really our accessibility expert, but somehow I wound up with this slide. But I will say that I have learned a lot about how to evaluate accessibility in ebooks while being on this committee. Things we were looking for specifically, whether there's a VPAT readily available on the site, or whether one has to ask for it and maybe even not get it. Whether there's clear help for the accessibility features that are available, whether the content is well structured so that it's easily read by screen readers, and whether it's easy to navigate by pages and ebook formats. So, so yes, this turned out to be really a wonderful thing to have a person on the committee who knew a lot more than many of us about this. Next slide, please. So after we delivered our report to the eBook Strategies Committee in our structure, they were very appreciative and they asked us to look at ebook aggregators. This is interesting because when we first did our evaluation, we were doing it on resources that were licensed across the entire system, but we don't license our ebook aggregators across the entire system, but this is such a pain point for individual librarians trying to make decisions between licensing an individual book in one platform or another, that this became a priority for us to look at. They also asked us to look at another, which we'd probably call one of the big major publishers' platforms. But we decided to concentrate, being intrigued by how looking at ebook aggregators might test our criteria. We decided to look at that next. Next slide, please. So this is an ongoing process, evaluating the aggregators and also in that same sense, platforms with inherent readers. And it's an ongoing process, and it is stretching our criteria a little bit because these resources need a slightly enhanced criteria because we have 3 additional experiences that that are not necessarily true when the publisher simply offers you a DRM-free PDF to download. And one of them is the usability of the online reading experience, the general usability, the accessibility, the various different features such as highlighting, note-taking, or excerpting from the text, and the ease of navigating within the books, which could be linking, it could be getting from the notes back to the actual text you were looking at. It could be going from one chapter to another, or finding the place in the book that you're looking for. Also, the availability limits and ease of DRM-free downloading. So many of these aggregator platforms will allow a certain portion to be downloaded DRM-free, but the ability to do that and the ease of doing that varies across the platforms, and sometimes across the publishers within the platforms. And then the checkout usability. So because these resources can be downloaded to be read offline, but they have DRM on them. They typically, these types of platforms will have a checkout possibility. And I want to say, spoiler alert, this is not going well for usability for the platforms we're looking at. And the platforms we're looking at right now, in our pilot-like evaluation, although there aren't so many more aggregators that we can truly consider this to be a pilot, are ProQuest eBook Central and EBSCO eBooks. And now I think we're back to Chan to talk about our future steps.
Thank you, Michelle. So I'll just mention quickly what we're gonna do next. So from what Michelle summarized our findings, you probably can get a sense of what we want for academic ebook reading experiences, like easy discovery, improved usability, single consistent login for all devices integrations. Those are something we're looking for. So the goals for our group, first, one of them is we're continue to do the testing platforms, and we'll also wanted to thinking about advocacy, increased awareness of usability issues among our colleagues here. And then the other interesting projects we're going to start pretty soon is testing the Palace app reader. This is an open source ebook reader app. It's called Palace. It was originally developed by New York Public Library, and it was called simply E before, but currently it's maintained by Lyrasis. Potentially, this ebook reader app can allow the library bring the books and audiobooks all together from different platforms and make them more accessible to users in one place. And we're gonna test how the discovery works and also the usability of the app compared to the other aggregators or publisher platforms. So we're very excited about this new project. It seems like a step forward for us. And we're also going to conduct the usability testing on the platform pretty soon. So that's all from us. Thank you, everyone. Now we're just going to open for the questions.
Fantastic. Thank you all. This is really interesting work, and congratulations on your on the results so far. There was a comment here from Bjorn, who is going to be speaking a little later. Michelle, you mentioned the issue with counter. Bjorn responded that for publishers that provide both HTML and PDF, it's important to use the unique title request matrix, which manages the relationship between items, because an item in our Ferber world, we get very messed up, and you can track ebook usage using those definitions between like books, chapters, etc. And it will also help resolve some of the sessions problem that was described. So there is a way to get around this, but it's not the most obvious way to get around it. I had a question about accessibility, which I thought was kind of interesting to hear your results on this. I think none of the publishers were providing EPUBs, and a few of them were providing HTML, but everyone was providing PDF. And it surprised me that from an accessibility perspective, Maybe publishers are doing a better job with their PDFs. And I'm happy to hear that if that's true, but I was surprised that there aren't more accessibility problems with a PDF dominated delivery mechanism.
No, I think you're right, Todd. In my experience, this is something that is common across many different sort of content types, not just ebooks, in the academic publishing world, ecosphere. And I think you're dealing with a lot of legacy content that has been generated over the years without sort of the knowledge that things need to be structured in a particular way to make them accessible and compliant. And so I think that's something that even we face at the digital library for content that we manage and maintain. Yes, that is a challenge in a heavily PDF dominant kind of environment.
Yeah.
Those are steps that I think everyone needs to kind of work together to figure out, how we can do this, or at least how can we at least allow users who need a compliant, accessible kind of format to be able to request it on demand. That may be a way to move forward in that area.
Mm-hmm. And one last question before we move on. Was there any usability difference between social sciences and STEM, arts and humanities, so across different domains?
I want to say we did find an interesting example based on the number of sort of alternate formats in various different in various different disciplines, where there would be series and sub-series that would have large chapter sections and then sub-chapter sections. And sometimes, depending on disciplines, these were more and less common. I would also say, footnotes versus endnotes can have disciplinary ramifications in terms of usability. And I would also say that, in a sense, the encyclopedias, so that's actually kind of a format difference. The encyclopedias that we found, regardless of discipline, were in a way the most problematic, and in a way should have been the least problematic.
Interesting. In what way were they the most problematic?
When you're in this PDF world, you're basically downloading a PDF from a letter, from like, you get all of the P or all of the Q or all of the R or all of the S. And these were one of the first types of resources to find themselves more useful online, because they'd be so much more searchable, so much more quick get in and get out. That's not been the experience with these PDF based resources that we found. But yeah, I would say the large, I can't even remember which particular disciplines had the worst issues with this, but when there were large parts and sections and subsections and chapter subsections of chapters, those disciplines would have the biggest problem. Also, I think it's an acknowledged fact that heavily image-based resources have significant, or disciplines have significant usability issues, both based on some images not even being able to be included in resources because of rights management, but also how you're going to see and perceive the item on the page, which is as problematic in EPUB as it is in PDF. So yeah, I would say image-based disciplines have significantly more problems in these PDF-based reading worlds. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that's such a great point from a production perspective. Setting aside the rights issues, which is a whole day-long conversation. I think from a production perspective, there are also ways in which publishers can use scalable vector graphics, which can expand and contract based on your reading experience, as opposed to, here's just a straight file and it may or may not show up on your image screen. Those are or as you rotate the PDF, it doesn't work kind of issues.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. Thank you again. This is really great work. I'm so glad. I have so many more questions for you. I might just send you a handful of emails about this because I'd love some more detail. But thank you, and I appreciate you joining us.
Thank you.